Welcome to our VA Tech's Tech It Yourself webinar series, where today we're going to be talking about the role of the Chief Digital Officer. My name is Lauries Jennings. I am an executive IT and data headhunter, and I have not worked a lot with the digital role, so I'm really excited to hear more about this today and some of the career tips the panelists are going to offer. Before we get started, I need to give a big shout out to our sponsor for the day, which is Wipro. Without our sponsors, we would not be able to do this programming. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wipro, and then I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we'll get going with the discussion. All right, Wipro is a leading global information technology, consulting, and business process services company that has over 180,000 employees serving clients across 6 continents. They harness the power of cognitive computing, hyper-automation, robotics, cloud, analytics, and emerging technologies to help clients adapt to the digital world and guide them to success. Wipro is deeply committed to the state of Virginia, and they recently invested in a sizable engineering studio right here in Richmond, which is led by Sharad Gupta, who is also on our RVA Tech board. So thank you, Sharad. If you want to learn more about Wipro in Virginia, you can find their website link in the chat box, along with Sherard's LinkedIn profile. All right, thanks again, Wipro. All right, let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Carla Owens, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Markel Corporation, which is headquartered here in Richmond, Virginia, but Carla resides in New Jersey. So thanks to Megan Perrott, by the way, from CapTech, who introduced us. Welcome, Carla, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rob Roy, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Sprint, and he's located up in Reston, but has deep ties to the Richmond area. I think he grew up here and went to Benedictine High School, and worked for Circuit City, one of our hometown favorites before they closed. And then, last but not least, we have local Chris Busse, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Terazo, which has locations in Richmond and Durham. All right, welcome. Thank you all for being here, and let's get started with each of you telling us about your journey to the role of Chief Digital Officer. Let's start with you, Carla, and then go to Rob and end with Chris.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So just to give a little bit of information and detail about my background. So I've been with Markel for about 18 months. When I joined, it was a new role to the organization, so they did not have a Chief Digital Officer prior, and recognized both a shift in market focused around technology and also focused around digital distribution, customer journey, digital marketing, decided to move forward with hiring a Chief Digital Officer. So that's when I joined in February of 2019. So to give a little bit of background about myself, I was actually born and raised an underwriter. So I was born in the insurance industry. I started my career on the underwriting side of the house in the specialty line products, and spent the first 8-9 years managing various offices for a large insurer across the country. So I got a lot of exposure relative to the products, to the marketplace, to how we interact with our distribution and our distribution channels. And then in 2008, I took a dramatic move and moved over to more of the technology implementation and digital side of the house, mostly for personal reasons and professional reasons. Personally, I really wanted to play a more strategic role within the organization, and thought that seeing where the future was headed in the technology and digital space, that this was a great opportunity for me. And secondly, it just really expanded my skill set and where I wanted to kind of take my career to the next level. So I started first initially with mostly focusing around big data and data and analytics projects and implementation of those tools into the underwriting process. So my underwriting background was really critical in making that transition, but it also was my first big move in really understanding digital and technology implementations. And then from there, held various roles, everything from starting as project managers and program management, and then moving into more of IT and digital strategy for a couple other large multinational insurance corporations. So I consider myself dangerous with technology, and truly serve as the translator between the business and the technology groups, and really transforming organizations and Markel into that digital journey.
All right, guess it's my turn. Um, Thanks for that. So I probably have a little bit more. This is Rob Roy again. So I probably have maybe a little bit more of a traditional background that would lead into kind of digital transformation or CDO role or experience manager role or something along those lines. But actually, as Laurie said, I started out hometown Richmond. First thing out of college was an internship at Circuit City doing web design. So I was a coder for a few years, and during that time, that was kind of the first of many e-commerce booms. And as Circuit City grew, I jumped around from role to role, basically with the idea in mind that I wanted to be an executive at a larger company at some point in my life. And so I figured I needed to learn the ropes of how to run a business. So they wanted someone for digital marketing, I'd go over there. They wanted someone for business development, I'd go over there. They want someone for merchandising, I'd go over there. And I did that until, for those of you that have been in Richmond for a while, until right around September of '08, when things got a little different for Circuit City, and had an opportunity to go run my own business. So I started a startup grocery delivery service, which given the times we're in today, was about 10 years too early, but it was a fun run, learning the ins and outs and the complexities of just operating an e-commerce business, really operating a business. And I think that's probably one of the keys to digital today, is that it's really just a business, and the platform you're using is the unique tools that you have, just like someone in the store has a shelves and stuff like that. You've got digital aisles as well. From there, I did a couple turns at big cable. So I worked for Time Warner Cable and I worked for Comcast. Really, at the beginning of what became merging into a chief digital officer. So I was a head of digital. At that time, it really meant you ran the websites, you ran the digital marketing, you ran the email marketing, all of those good things. And then it started to evolve. I came to Sprint and I saw that, chief digital officer is really about transforming the people and transforming the processes. And along with that comes the technology. And so my focus at Sprint up until our merger with T-Mobile had really been about people and process first, and how you transform them to be more digital, to digitize that group, to digitize our processes, and really focus in on how you transform from the inside out. And that's been a really exciting, set of work to, see grow, and also challenging. Thank you.
Great. Well, hey, my name is Chris Busse, and great to see everybody today. So I guess my journey has been one that really started in, I think, what we would call the traditional IT space in '96 or so. Worked at the Department of Health at the Office of Emergency Medical Services, upgrading RAM and computers back when that was the kind of thing you used to do on desktop computers. But really fell in love with software development and had the opportunity to go to local web builder Tecna back in the day that got bought by IXL, and that .com boom went bust. And then I went and worked with nonprofit organizations for about the next 8 or 9 years or so. And where I started to realize really the power of digital actually kind of came from marrying what I had learned about, website usability, what we called, information architecture back then, the UI UX practice, and then seeing how nonprofits could use data to really do things like direct mail appeals. And I started to develop a bit more of a perspective about, the sort of practitioner approach to digital, very much looking at, I'm a user, what is the user experience? And then you have kind of the higher level view of how do we influence human behavior at scale using what we can with digital systems. And I think that's where a lot of my interest really started to go. And I think a lot of that's that intersection of digital systems and data. And so from after that, in early 2009, 2010, helped start a digital marketing agency, and then went to Capital One, where I was in the digital organization as a digital product manager, actually with developers as my customers, helping go through 2 iterations of their internal developer portal and the launch of a public developer portal. And left there in 2016 and helped launch Terazo, where we solve all kinds of digital challenges, but a lot of them are very much the data-oriented ones or the integration-oriented ones. We are looking less at, how does an individual user interact with the digital system, and more, how can digital systems transform both, customer bases, customer behavior, as well as behavior within organizations, kind of in mass there.
Thanks. So as you can see, there's a lot of different routes to this role, to getting into the Chief Digital Officer. And it's going to vary from company to company what the role does. So with that, why don't each of you talk about the role, the way you define the role of the Chief Digital Officer at your company, and then what you do on a daily basis. And I'm going to start with Rob this time and go to Chris and end with Carla. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think my as I said in my intro, my thinking's evolved quite a bit. Kind of initially when I came into the role of Chief Digital Officer, it was really about, how can you get more people to interact online? How can you get more people to do things digitally for you, self-service wise, whether it's, questions they have, concerns they have, to reduce really the cost to serve. I think probably a lot of either lead or senior web folks feel that way. I've really evolved my thinking into how do we transform the company from the inside out. We can't expect our customers to be digital if our company can't be digital. And so our focus was really primarily around people and process, and how do we, quote unquote, digitize the rest of the organization. And so, early on, my days would start out with, is the website running? Are we making sales? Are we doing things? To really evolving that and allowing that to become more BAU and running, and then starting to work more in a matrix set of ways. And so, my days consist of talking to the head of care, the head of retail, the head of HR, the head of finance, the head of operations, so on and so forth, to work through problems that they're having and help solve problems for them. Care is a great example of partnership. We build AI models for them to take the burden off of the human agents. In HR, we build RPA to allow them to scan for resumes much quicker, so they can go through thousands of resumes with a machine versus with human eyes. And so we're really working across a broad spectrum of the organization to make us more efficient, to make us more effective, both cost and time, and really make digital a tool in everyone's toolbox. So really, my focus has really been on the democratization of digital, so that there is no just digital team. It's digital's everywhere, but each team has a specific use for those digital tools. So that's my focus.
Yeah, so my focus as a Chief Digital Officer, and bearing in mind that I'm in very much a consulting organization, consulting capacity that's been growing over the past 4 years, but still certainly a much smaller organization than my fellow panelists. I would say the biggest focus I have in the CDO role is working to develop our partnerships, because that's critical for us. We very much take as a vendor, right, an agnostic approach to who we have as partners and who we want to recommend. We're not, that company that's a Microsoft certified partner trying to do all the Microsoft things, or AWS trying to do all the AWS things. So I spent a lot of time on vendor calls, vendor briefings, kind of understanding what digital things do we really think are worth adopting out there in the product space that we want to carry forward, that we find are as universally applicable to our customers as possible, while also something that we're willing to stand behind. And then to take that further, a lot of my work is involved in some of the efforts to help the customer understand, what is this change going to mean to them. I think a lot of people, they see the pain that's in front of them. They work with a vendor, they work with an internal team in digital to understand how they can solve this pain. But that future state vision, once they've solved that pain, to understand, all right, what is now our new BAU, as you were talking about there, Rob? What does the new operations world look like? And I feel like if organizations kind of can get an idea of what that looks like prior to embarking upon these things, they can plan for what it means when they come out on the other side of that. So it's a lot of storytelling at the end of the day. It's a lot of sharing anecdotes, sharing stories, you know, warnings, things, lessons learned, and trying to find what can we take from one example and apply to another there, very much in a consulting capacity.
Okay, Laurie, I'll just jump right in on, it's really great to hear each of the stories and the focus areas. I think being relatively new to the organization and it being a relatively new role for us at Markel, it's been a lot of learning and listening for the first, year of the role, just really trying to identify how we identify digital for the organization. I've learned really quickly that there was a lot of great digital work happening at Markel prior to me joining. So a lot of it was around organization, around digital, defining the definition of digital for the organization and learning where there's opportunities within each part of the organization and where are there some opportunities where we can apply things across the enterprise level. Customer becomes a critical component for us in regards to who is our customer and how we serve them through various digital channels and really understanding what those roadmaps and channels look like. And it's also been a lot for us about building our team, building our trust with our business partners to come to us to look for those digital solutions and have the ability to then see where it can be applied across our diverse portfolio from both a product and a distribution standpoint. So I spend a lot of time with our business partners, learning their problems, understanding what they're doing. Our team spends a lot of time solutioning them together and putting together roadmaps for the future. But then at the same time, really helping the organization define what is digital core. And to the points that are already made on the panel, digital is encompassed in so many aspects of the business. So it's not just one organization that's doing digital. So it's how we support other parts of the organization and moving things forward that also has a digital component as well.
Thank you for that. So again, very different depending on, which organization you're in and the size and complexity, or the size and the industry you're in. You talked a lot about working across the organizations in the business. How does your role, you mentioned data a lot. I heard Robin mention that, and Chris and Carla probably. Talk about your interaction with the other CXOs, the CIO, the CTO, the Chief Data Officer. And maybe start with Carla on that, and then Rob, and then Chris, please feel free to chime in. I know that your organization's a little different, but give your insights as well.
Yeah, sure. The CIO and the CDO are part of our team, so we report into the same reporting structure. So the alignment is there from an organization standpoint. And luckily and thankfully, the alignment is there in regards to the way that we run our operations as well. We recognize those dependencies. We're meeting together to make sure that there's roadmap alignment in regards to what we're doing, because we know that those dependencies exist. But more importantly, a lot of our capabilities and assets that we build have data wrappers around them or have an IT component that needs to be considered as part of that. And I think that synergy and that communication needs to align, not just at the top of the level, but also as you move through the organization. Because now when we look at technology solutions, we're not just asking it from an IT lens, which automatically, in my perspective, includes a digital lens and a data lens, but we're also asking that next level question in regards to, from a digital standpoint, how would this particular asset interact with our customers, whether that's internally or externally, and where is some support that the digital team can do that for this large program that we may be implementing that from a historical perspective may have been perceived as an IT project, but now we're looking at it as not just an IT project, but an IT project with a digital component and a data component to really be able to serve our customers in the best way. So that alignment needs to exist at the top, but it also needs to exist as we move through the teams, and that making sure that collaboration is continuously happening.
Yeah, I think I'll just add a little bit to that. I mean, I think, for me, the two teams are starting to merge to a degree. I look at, my best friend in the organization is the CIO, or left hand, right hand. Without the capabilities that his team brings, we can't go forward. Without the capabilities my team brings, we can't go forward. And quite honestly, there's a lot of legacy systems that the CIO has to deal with that I just don't even want to bother with. And so to a degree, I look at what we're doing as building kind of the next version of our system, while, you know, from a BAU perspective, our CIO allows those highways, those access gates into the legacy biller, the legacy CRM, the Hadoop environments that we have, so on and so forth. And so it's really key to have partnership, but I'd even expand it beyond that, because I think that again, going back to the idea that digital is pervasive, you have to be in sync with everyone. The CMO, the CDO, the COO, the head of HR, the CIO, so on and so forth. And so I think that it kind of flows throughout. As it relates to data, I've really pushed for, when I first started, we had a center of excellence for data. And then that got blown up and all sorts of groups started using data, and then it became a mess. And you have these things called data leakage, where, you know, you have your main body of information, and then the number of times it gets cut, the data gets a little bit less useful to you. And you find an organization spending more time arguing about whose data is correct, and explain how and what source you pulled it from. That ends up being 29 of the 30 minutes of your meeting, which isn't usually super helpful. So what I started to really do is come up with a concept around democratizing the data. And so it's kind of a quasi way of having a center of excellence, but that center of excellence is pervasive throughout the organization. So you have one team in charge of housing all of the data and putting all the data together, and then you allow every group access to that data, but it's in a little bit more of a structured way. And so we don't have a traditional data officer, but what we've done is we've created a way to allow everyone to have access to the same data, and that allows for a lot more collaboration, a lot more usage of the data, and making more kind of factual based decisioning, which is really exciting. And then for us, you know, it gives just, again, another tool for everyone to be able to use to all be on the same page. And so that's helpful. In the future, you know, does a data officer become important? I think I go back and forth on that. I feel more that it's probably going to turn into a privacy officer than it's going to be a data officer, with a privacy officer having a team of really smart data scientists and folks under her. But for now, you know, I think that, you know, giving your company access to the data in a smart, responsible way is kind of the way to go. But then again, you know, future of, you know, everyone wanting to be very understanding of the privacy and the concerns that, you know, and the power that comes with having this data. I see that falling into the lap of the privacy officer.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the first part of the question there, sort of the interaction with the other executives, C-suite type things. I think we've got two perspectives on that. One, I think often in digital organizations that I have worked in, often don't have the development teams themselves. And so that's where working with like a CIO organization that maybe actually has the agile development pods and developing that partnership is critical. And so knowing how to, you know, from the career panel perspective, right, how to build consensus, reach consensus, make sure that you're taking everybody's needs into account and making it a win for everybody. The other thing I think about that is I've seen, somewhat from a consulting capacity, but also going through different enterprises over time, it's a lot about helping bring people along on the journey. You know, sometimes people get recruited into like a CDO position because of previous successes they have, and they might be chomping at the bit to get to that, or even be asked to say like, all right, what they have, we want that, so come over here and help, or come as a consultant. And sometimes it's those things that seem like, you know, overnight successes for an organization when they launch something might be a 3, 4, 5 year development journey with many internal iterations before it becomes an external launch. And so I think, you know, in the CDO role, they can really act as a partner to help other key executive stakeholders understand what those journeys look like. and the need to go through some of those iterations, even if it's not taking them, today right where they want to see there with a peer or a competitor. On the data perspective, I think there is no modern digital platform that is not completely beholden to data, right? And so Rob touched on what we sometimes call the data lineage issue of where did this come from, how is it being used, how can it be used? You see that even more when you have to keep up with regulations like GDPR and the right to be forgotten and customer records and things like that. I also think that the data space is one of the areas these days where there's a lot of smoke and mirrors or FUD or whatever you want to call it between AI and ML, where some of that's just, somewhat marginally advanced statistical models and what is big data really, right? And then these event-driven architectures that have come out. And more of that from the vendor space where I interface a lot with, they're trying to black box that, right? So you have things like, oh yeah, we've got this AI-enabled chatbot or something like that. And what does that really mean? And I think this is an opportunity for, the CDO role in an organization to really develop some kind of independent thought leadership around that, because I think they tend to have the ear and the respect of a CIO organization, the ear and the respect of a business organization, and they can kind of cut through some of the vendor speak and things like that, and help represent a strategic direction on some of these more cutting edge things that are maybe a bit more confusing, or that vendors try to twist into their own marketing speak.
Great. Thanks for all those perspectives. All right, so another role that ties in closely, we hear a lot about in order to become a digital organization, is the product organization. So can each of you speak about how your role interfaces with your product organization? And are you setting strategic direction around your organization's product management initiatives? Who wants to take this one first? Let's start with you, Chris, and we'll go to Carla and then Rob.
Yeah, so so I could definitely speak. When I was at Capital One, that was a digital product manager role that I was in. But it was very clear that the product org was going to kind of set a lot of that strategic direction and direct where a lot of that funding goes. And we see that in our work with enterprises today, where one of my sort of catchphrases or things I like to say is a full backlog is a funded backlog. And so if you can start a new digital initiative and really start to prove business value and get your customers involved in creating that virtuous feedback loop on a given digital product, and whether those customers are internal or external, there is always things that can be added to a properly managed backlog. And so I see, sometimes people talk about that CDO role of the digital organization as being the one that initiates that digital transformation. But I think that's like a fire that you can't put out once it gets started. And so if you take really those modern product management methodologies, which basically comes down to talking to the customer, empathizing for the customer, whoever that customer might be, and then advocating that empathy back into your organization, both with the business, but especially with your IT delivery teams, so that the empathy for the customer isn't just on the front end developer that showed them the wireframes and got the feedback about the nice looking website or the mobile app, but the empathy for the customer comes all the way down into your middleware developers and your data engineers, because I think that a lot of good innovation can come from that layer back up. And so I'm a big believer in a good product management organization keeping a pretty open backlog, and then making decisions what to build or what not to build as a prioritization exercise, because I think that kind of innovation can come from almost anywhere within an organization, especially if people have the opportunity to talk to people outside or talk with those customers.
Yeah, I'll just kind of hit on what Chris said, but also kind of apply it to our industry and insurance. So when we think about product from an insurance standpoint, we are insuring a promise. So our product is actually words. Our product is a piece of paper, and then ultimately the claim, paying for the dollars that we provide for a claim that happens, and ensuring that someone can get back up on their feet. So I always make sure when we make the distinction between product ownership from an insurance perspective, we have what I would call the insurance product, which is our product line leaders relative to coverage and underwriting of that product for our customers. And then there's the digital assets that support the distribution of that and the exploitation and marketing and the customer experience in order to access that product. And so when we move forward to build out the digital organization within Markel, we thought that it was really important that we had identified what we wanted to call our core digital assets and have that product ownership sit within the digital org. To Chris's point, exactly, because through that proper product management of those digital assets, we could then use customer journey, empathy mapping to really kind of understand the experience for the customer and make sure that we're putting forth items into the backlog and enhancements and new assets that really solve for those problems. We then had the capability of having that advocacy for those digital assets to then find opportunities to apply them across the enterprise. So for us, we felt that being able to work in partnership with our IT development and using our digital assets and continuing to enhance and build new ones in order to empower our business was the really good value of bringing a digital organization into Markel. So for us, it's still the beginning. You know, we had an agile and a product ownership model when I came into Markel. It was working great. So us bringing that together and also bringing those synergies together amongst our teams and skill sets amongst our team has really allowed us to place more emphasis around customer experience, product, you know, and distribution, and also really help us guide the way to leading through better product line of business distribution for our partners.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. I think that you know, product is another one of those things that's becoming very blurred unless you're a manufacturer of XYZ and that just shows up on your shelves, or you know, but now that things have become so much more digital, it becomes really a set of creations that are done by a large matrix organization. For us, I like to start with a kind of data first model, and you know, what's the data telling us? What do we need? We have the kind of quote unquote traditional and non-traditional product ownership under my organization, and we do that because it allows us to you know, see a really nice flow across all of the pieces and parts of the creation. As both of my colleagues here have talked about, you know, the understanding of what the customer wants or expects, the empathy around why you're building what you're building, the usability of what you're doing, the research that's being done, and then, you know, when you have those groups kind of together, you can work them within pods. And so the way that we've structured ourselves is we've got you know, data scientists, we've got UX, you know, kind of creative-led designing, we've got product management, we've got you know, merchants, and we've got IT folks that all kind of sit together to solve problems, to come up with solutions. We try to do that in a rapid form that allows us to get many things out very quickly, test them, learn from them, augment them, or throw them away. I hope to throw more things away than I do launch, because that means that we're really kind of pressing the bounds of our comfort and really, you know, thinking about things in a unique way. But we also try to spend as much time hearing, listening, learning from what customers are saying. You know, Chris, I think, had mentioned a little bit about, you know, kind of everybody in the universe is selling some sort of AI widget to do something. It's all black box. It very rarely works as advertised, but it looks really awesome in a demo. You know, for us, we made the concerted effort to partner very closely with a few small groups of outside people that would help us to build the infrastructure and the setup. But then we took upon ourselves this same setup that I just talked about to build out an AI experience that was that we're able to productize using all of the groups that I just spoke about, but then also incorporating our care partners into it. And so that kind of talks a little bit about how the digital group, the CDO, it has to start to really blur the lines of what your purview is. If we had just gone off and built you know, a product for care and handed it to them, they'd look at us and say, what the heck is this? We're not going to use it. And by the way, I've seen many of those products happen like that before. But what we did is we brought the top care agents into our building. We sat with them for 3 weeks. We sat side by side, listening to calls, reading chats, watching chats, and built a product for them that basically they wanted. And when we were able to roll it out, it was something that they could be proud of also, that worked really well. And so it's not only about getting the empathy of the quote unquote outside customer, but how do you work with the inside customer? How do you create products, digitized products that work well internally as well as externally? And I think that's really what product management is starting to morph into, is it's not only about the latest and greatest new widget and how that's going to work when it gets shipped into the customer's hands, but taking all of the data, taking all of the information that you have, and using that matrix of information that other pockets and other groups of individuals in your organization have to make that product even better. And so it becomes a product built by the company versus a product built by a unit within the company. And I think that's where you get some of your best work.
Thank you. Well, we spent a lot of time talking about the role, because it is, like we've seen, it's very different. It's a newer role. And it interfaces and blurs between a lot of the other roles we've discussed. So we wanted to kind of break that down for you before we get into some of the skill sets that are needed. Because what I've been finding doing these panels is that a lot of these skill sets are very similar, and a lot of the things, the advice that the panelists are giving us are very similar, across CIO, CDO, or Chief Data Officer, et cetera. So with that, let's talk about the skills. What do you think are the most critical skills to getting into this role of Chief Digital Officer? And then share too, some ways people can get those skills, some things they can do. What do you see people doing that help them get into the position to move up in your organization, whether it be to the CDO or the next level? And we'll start with Carla on this, and Rob, and then we'll end with you, Chris.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because of the newness of the role and how it's actually evolved and changed and actually come into existence based on industry. So from my perspective, I consider it to be, at this point, specifically, especially as a newer organization, having a CDO is really a change agent for the organization, and really kind of helping them understand that digital transformation journey and getting them along the way. So when I think about skill sets, I think diversity helps relative to roles that you have played. There's not necessarily always just a straight line technology path. There's not always just a straight line business path. Just to give an example, my path was very zigzagged because I was creative and intuitive and wanting to learn more and put myself in more strategic roles rather than just managing a line of business or managing a particular product. So I think you have to be open to some flexibility. You have to be curious about the business segment that you're going after and learning as much as you can about the business. And you also have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit and challenge the norm, because that's how you kind of gain that skill set around being a true change agent and helping an organization transform. So, what's been interesting also about digital and technology is there's just so many different resources that you can tap into to kind of stay up to time and what's going on. So that's always kind of just a requirement, but really digging into the industry or the organizations where you want to evolve your opportunity in the digital space and really starting to learn more about those problems and taking on roles that help solve those problems, I think puts you in a position that people start to think, oh, this is someone who's going to encourage, and not only encourage, but lead change within an organization, which I think is a critical component for being successful in this role.
Yeah, that's good. I definitely echo that. I'll add just a few more, I guess. For me, I think experience. The way that I think about experience is, do you understand how the business runs? Do you understand how business runs? Do you understand how operations? Look for opportunities to be in many different units to understand the complexities of business. That really helps. So experience kind of trumps all. Just knowing what other people are going through, why their job is hard, why their job, why they're saying no, why they're telling you that it's impossible, or something like that. From my history in working, as a web developer and things like that, even though I'm a little removed from it, when I talk to somebody, I can understand and empathize why they're saying what they're saying, but I can also help solution for them other ways to do things. So experience is really helpful. The next one is storytelling. As a CDO, the ability to put the idea out there and be able to be present and excitable and get other people on board with you is going to be so important, because you can't just run digital with yourself, by yourself, alone. So you have to bring people along with you. And so your storytelling and your communication are super key. Innovative. If you're just going to come in and do BAU and run a website, that's not a CDO. A CDO is somebody that's going to come in and push the bounds of what the company's doing. It's going to make people uncomfortable. If you're not making people uncomfortable in your role, you're not challenging the norms enough, and you're letting people sit back and do what they've always done. Digital CDO is about innovation, about being at the cusp of the next thing, and so that's really important. And then along with that, understanding new trends, new products, new technology. Can you play around with them? Can you understand them? Do you have the guts to allow that to be put into your infrastructure to be tested, to learn something new? If you and your 5 competitors are all using the same thing, you should expect the same results. And so, that's key. But if all 5 of you guys are using the same thing, then this last tip is most important: execution. Can you, as a leader, get your group to execute? Can you, as a leader, get your group motivated, excited to do what's needed? So those are mine.
Yeah, so I'll add to that. Rob, you mentioned the storytelling there, and I'll add that there's I think a sales component to that, right? And that is really the ability to pitch, which I know as a vendor, right, we think of pitches to get new business, but I think CDOs and digital organizations are often working to drive new investment, right? And enterprises, organizations traditionally invest to solve pain, right? But if you go back to the Henry Ford, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd say a better horse when he brought the car. I think a lot of digital transformation is that kind of change. And for people who are, peers that you need to build consensus with, you can tell the story of why this is good, but they're focused on their pain or their problem over here. But if you really master the art of how do you pitch an idea, you tell the story, develop the empathy, and you make the sale for what it can do within a business and get those investments, I think that can really help drive the success. Because at the end of the day, if you can't move your initiatives forward and overcome the organizational inertia, we do it because it's the way we've always done things around here kind of inertia, you won't have much to do in this role.
Right, thank you. So I don't see any questions. We've gotten to the point where I've finished my questions. If there's anybody that has a question they'd like to ask the panelists, please put those in the chat box. I would like to ask y'all, and as I see that, I'll get to it, but how do people get this? I mean, we hear about storytelling and we hear about sales, and some people are moving from IT and they might be more introverted. Some people might come from marketing, or there's all different channels of coming into this role. How do people go about getting these skill sets? Is it education? Is it finding a mentor? What recommendations? I mean, what did y'all do?
Practice. Getting in front of the, I still remember, my Circuit City days as a lowly web developer, standing up in front of, the leadership team and being, absolutely chewed out by Doug Moore, who I absolutely love, and to this day I still talk with, over an idea of putting a digital product into our weekly circular. And that was just unheard of at the time. And it turned out to be the first and most unique, the first time anyone ever put a digital only product into a Sunday circular, right? The golden goose for Circuit City or Best Buy at the time. And, it was that moment when I was getting, kind of chewed out, that that I learned the most. You know, okay, I didn't come as prepared because I didn't realize I needed this, this, and this, and this. But I had the confidence to get up there and try it. And, you know, the next time it couldn't have gone any worse. So I looked at it as like a win-win for everybody. It was like, all right, well, you know, the first one didn't go so smooth, but I'm going to keep trying and trying and trying. And quite honestly, I think that's where you get the most. I mean, you can obviously talk to people and learn from their past, but until you do it, right? I mean, if you want to be a professional baseball player, you don't just go talk to somebody and say, hey, how should I do this? And then just go out there and assume you're going to do it, right? You need to go do it, right? It's that, you know, 10,000 hours or 1,000 hours of practice or whatever they, you know, whatever they talk about. So I think that's your biggest key. Look for those opportunities to stand up, even if it's just in a staff meeting, it's a team meeting. You know, say something. If it's an all hands meeting, ask a question. Just get used to kind of being out there, and that brings I think that brings a ton of confidence for you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say take chances with your career. I mean, I left what I would call a P&L job to go into what was considered an implementation of technology job with not a single tech background to carry me along. I just hope that my business knowledge and some great partnerships with some great tech and data people would let us get there. And it was a big risk, and it wasn't a promotion. It was a new opportunity for me to expand, to change my exposure, to make people think about me differently rather than just a leader who runs a profit and loss book, but to make people look at me from a strategy, for someone who can set strategy and someone who can execute. So finding those opportunities and knowing that sometimes it's not the next big promotion that gives you the audience to show that you can execute and that you can deliver. And I think that for me was a major stepping stone in being able to put together my resume, not just around diversity in my background, but also in the ability to actually get things done and making sure I took jobs that allowed me that opportunity. Because if you just kind of go to a job that doesn't give that to you, then back to Rob's comment around, well, then you're just running a BAU, you know? So make sure that you're being specific about showing your skill set and the next choices in your career that you make.
Yeah, and I think you know, I think there are opportunities. I'm by nature a hands-on experiential learner, and opportunities that I've found during my career for that have been things like a startup weekend competition where you come together and within 48 or 72 hours, you and a team have to create a startup business and pitch it. Many of those turn out to be digital type initiatives. Also, hackathons are a great opportunity, either external or organizing them internally. You don't have to code to present and do a thing at a hackathon. A lot of those teams are kind of fake it till you make it kind of scenarios or lightweight prototyping. So there's those kind of opportunities. The other thing I would say is, you know, if you can find different ways to communicate within your organization, a lot of enterprises have the standard slide deck and it has to be this format, this template, all that. If you're innovating, right, there can be some innovative ways to communicate. I had a pretty big win earlier in my career where during a hothouse kind of multi-day exercise, my output from it was an animated explainer video. So I found an app on my iPad that could do that, and everybody else kind of had the standard presentation. And I remember, I think I attribute some of my success to the outcome of that, partly to the idea, but partly in the way I communicated it, and it had a little bit of a built-in demo. And that was something that the executive sponsor could take and further socialize with their peers and their sponsors up the chain, because it had the voiceover built in, it had the animation, it really showed that idea in a way that the PowerPoint deck medium just couldn't. So I think, you know, don't afraid to experiment a bit and be a bit creative to get your ideas for innovation across there.
Great. Or we do have one question coming in from a panelist, Scott Sutton, who asked, how do you build an experimentation culture? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it. You know, for me, this is so key. I think that to do it, you have to ensure that your teams know that failure is a success. They can't be afraid to try. They can't be afraid to test. They can't be afraid to be out there. In cultures where failure is, you know, kind of yelled at, failure is thought of as poor performance, you're never going to get there. If you can build a culture of you know, kind of safety, if you will, where it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to learn. It's okay to test. That's when you can build the experimental culture. For us, or for me, what I've always done is I preach with my group that 80% of my dollars are for BAU and 20% are for figuring it out. And we use that 20 to go test. We go use that 20 to play around. We go use that 20 to think of new stuff. But it really does start at the leadership group. You could have a couple of, kind of associates that want to do testing, but if their manager is too worried that failing that experiment will not let them hit their numbers, you'll never get it. But if it comes from the top down, you're going to get a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity. People want to go test. People just don't like being marked failures or called failures. And for me, experimentation, out of 100 tests, if we fail 99 times, I call that a success. I always joke with my A/B testing group that don't tell me you're testing a red button and a green button. I don't care. It's not super exciting for me. For me, that's you're just going off and seeing if someone likes a different color for today or tomorrow. You tell me whether they want a button or not. That starts to get a little bit more interesting for me. So really pushing the bounds of it, and it starts at the top. If people aren't willing to be part of and own the results of that experiment, it's going to be really tough. So I encourage you to encourage your managers and the powers that be up top to help perpetuate that culture.
Right.
Yeah, Rob, I think you made a point earlier when you talked about you like to throw away more work than maybe gets delivered. And I've found that throwaway work is a very loaded term in organizations. And you can get a real quick gauge on that leadership culture based on people's reaction to that. Oh, we're not going to do that. It's throwaway work. Or, well, let's design an experiment around it. Let's create a validated learning. And then let's put together that, package it up, and share the knowledge that we learned with that and that storytelling approach.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I do also think it comes from the top, and it's sometimes difficult to make sure that it goes all the way down. I will say bringing the organization along to also be a part of that culture and to also sponsor that culture is critical as well. Because when you have a business leader that is really finding the value in that test and learn, and then you're able to promote that across the organization, there's almost this mentality of, well, I want that too. So those are some of the greatest wins, is when that test and learns not only brings that business value, but also you get a champion at the same time. And that's when it also makes it really exciting. So learning to celebrate those very loudly so that it's shared across the organization.
All right, we have another question. This is going to be our last question because we are running towards the 1 o'clock time frame. So Michael Clary asked, and you might have touched on this a little bit already, but in your organizations, what roles and groups report up through you versus the CIO?
I can go. For me, I've got front-end developers, marketing, digital marketers, data scientists, merchants, product managers, operations, business analysts, some call center folks, ton of AI groups, and then some API developers as well. So, really kind of and data analytics as well. So pretty robust. You could pull that apart and call it, Airbnb. You could call it Warby Parker. It looks like what a traditional company born in a digital cloth would look like from an end-to-end perspective.
From our perspective, and as I said, relatively new organization within Markel, so have only been with the organization for 18 months and just started building out our team within the last 6 to 8. So we have product ownership of those core digital assets that I mentioned as well. We have digital marketing. We're building out a center of excellence around customer experience, design thinking, customer empathy. And then we also have a digital engagement arm, which we thought was very critical in regards to being aligned with our business partners and also finding those opportunities that we could apply across the enterprise. So making sure that we actually had an enterprise approach to digital, not just a divisional approach, and making sure that we have those digital expertise and engagement in order to bring those in for solutioning and opportunity through our product leadership.
Yeah, and so I think I'll answer on what I kind of see as I survey different clients in our portfolio there. I think the biggest thing is whether or not the IT delivery, whether or not the digital organization of CDO has their own software delivery teams. Seems to be the biggest differentiator between what's in that CDO versus the CIO. I think the majority of the time you see those software delivery teams in the CIO organization. That's often where they traditionally exist. And some of that more experience type things like maybe UI, UX, front end, digital marketing in the CDO organization. But I do think it's interesting when they can kind of fall all under one umbrella. It definitely simplifies a lot of the political and funding conversations there. We also see CIO organizations that do not, especially in more legacy businesses, that don't have any IT delivery teams or software delivery teams because that is not a practice that exists in that enterprise. In fact, we had a very large client where they were not allowed to hire anybody with the title software engineer, software developer, software architect, anything like that. So that's where they become very dependent, on that vendor management, that vendor-driven software. And so you see the CIO organizations running a lot of the BAU, the ops, some of the infrastructure type things, and get into like the on-prem hosting and things like that the CDO might want to take to the cloud for all the advantages that offers. So I think it comes down a lot to where does the IT delivery live versus where the product backlog coming from.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, we've reached our time. I really appreciate Carla, Chris, and Rob, your time. And thank you so much to Wipro, again, for being the sponsor for this webinar, and to RVA Tech for hosting it. Look on the website for future webinars that we'll be having throughout the year. All right, thanks so much and have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.